What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here. And unfortunately, we're trying a new laptop setup to get around the Skype problem. And because of technical issues, we're not running our BAM user feed today. So apologies to everybody who's doing that. And but anyway, we're just going to muddle through this all and try and figure out why none of this stuff works. All right. So anyway, it's Tuesday, November 21st, 2017. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, working with me to try and sort out these technical issues, and get everything, working again, for, the show here. So let me get this back up here. Oh, no, it's, I gotta tell you, this is really, Skype has just turned into this nightmare monster, of problems. Ever since Microsoft took it over and ever since the update in August, it's just been one problem after another after another. Okay, so we're gonna get this going. There we are, we're all set. All right. So we'll just deal with these issues here. So, 3 weeks to go till the Alabama election, and the deep state and the corporate media are still out there attacking Judge Roy Moore with zero evidence whatsoever. And the accuser's stories are continuing to fall apart, and it's getting even more interesting because Gloria Moore has been asked to produce the yearbook that supposedly has Roy Moore's signature in it, backing up the story of accuser Beverly Nelson. And Gloria Allred is refusing to produce that. And even more bizarrely, she is saying that even if the signature turns out to be a fake, it doesn't undermine Beverly Nelson's allegations. Of course it does. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But there's been another witness that has come on forward, and this is Rhonda Ledbetter. And today she's a retired public school teacher. She's the senior choir director at a Baptist church, teaches children at a local daycare center. She was a waitress at the Old Hickory House for 3 years, from 1979 to 1977 through 1979. And she was a college student at Jacksonville State University at the time and worked varying shifts different times of the day. Now, this is the restaurant where Beverly Nelson is claiming she had the encounter with Roy Moore. Now, Beverly Nelson claims that she was working as a waitress at the restaurant when she was just 15 years old. But the Old Hickory House required employees to be at least 16. So that part of the story has fallen apart. Beverly Nelson's story claimed that the dumpsters were in back, and that's where the alleged interaction with Roy Moore took place. But the restaurant's dumpsters are on the side of the building. There's no room between them and the building to park a car. And basically, the restaurant never closed at 11 p.m. as Nelson claimed. Apparently they served a local factory where their late shift got out and would come on over for dinner. And customers at the counter were served by the bartender or cook and not by any waitresses. So that part of the story has fallen apart. And this witness, Rhonda, went to corporate media outlets and said they weren't interested. She did 2 interviews, neither of which were aired, and she took this information forward, and the corporate media just wasn't interested. And we may actually be seeing a watershed moment in the downfall of the corporate media, because this was their last attempt to prove that they could sway public opinion, to control your mind, to control what you're thinking, and they have fallen flat on their face. Now, more witnesses have come forward. Johnny Bellew Sr. is a former police officer with over 2 decades of experience in the Etowah County Sheriff's Department and the Gadsden Police Department, and he issued a statement. I was an officer with the Etowah County Sheriff's Department for the 1970s, which means I worked in the courthouse, and I knew who Roy Moore was since he was the deputy district attorney at the time. I was a regular customer at Old Hickory House, and I never once saw Judge Moore come in there. If he had, I would have immediately recognized him. I also never met Beverly Nelson during any of the many times I frequented there. I can't even say that she actually worked there. Another witness has come on forward, Renee Shavira of Huntsville, Alabama, says she was also a waitress at the Old Hickory House during the summer of 1977 before her senior year of high school. And when she heard Beverly Nelson's story, the first thing that stuck out was that she never saw Roy Moore ever coming into the restaurant. It just wasn't the courthouse crowd. They were serving the local blue-collar workers. And again, verifies the dumpsters were on the side of the building, not on the back. So that story has just completely fallen apart. And by the way, again, the media has completely and totally failed on this situation, because as of the last poll, Roy Moore is leading Doug Jones 58% to 35%. So the people of Alabama realize this has been a political hatchet job. They realize the corporate media is lying to them. And this could be the watershed where the corporate media begins its long, slow glide into total irrelevance. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And the Democrats, now that Bill Clinton is out of office and out of power, and now that Hillary Clinton is not going to be the president, they're not considered untouchable, apparently, and we're starting to see Democrats come on out and say, well, yeah, there was something going on with Bill Clinton while he was president. He does have a girl problem, and they're turning on him. We're actually hearing statements from Democratic senators that, in hindsight, Bill Clinton should have resigned. Of course, Bill Clinton is not the resigning kind. That's why they call him Slick Willie. But again, I said, they created this firestorm. They started this whole thing with Roy Moore, and between Roy Moore and Harvey Weinstein, it's just ballooned all over the place. There are allegations and accusations, all over the place. And it's starting to hit a lot of people. But again, you need to be careful. Some of these allegations are false. It certainly looks like the ones against Roy Moore were false. Now, actor Jeremy Piven, who's the former star of the Mr. Selfridge TV show, was accused by 3 women that he sexually molested them. He voluntarily took a lie detector test, and he took polygraph tests regarding the 3 claims, and then an overall blanket lie detector test to determine if he'd ever assaulted a woman anywhere, and he passed it with no signs of deception. So we have to be very, very cautious. Remember, back in the 1990s, the militant feminists were out there saying that, yeah, it was okay for a woman to make false accusations of rape or assault against a man. They called it empowerment. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call here. Steve in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I have to agree with you. Accusations and allegations are not proof, and for some reason they're treating it as evidence and proof. But no, I agree. We're all, actually, you and I and all men are targets now if allegations and accusations can be proof. And I was really disappointed to see that I saw that Charlie Rose was dismissed by 3 different networks, and I saw also on Drudge Report that Oliver Stone is now being attacked with sexual allegations. And so this thing is a huge witch hunt. There's a bigger agenda behind this whole thing, because they're throwing both Democrat and Republicans under the bus on this one. There's something much bigger brewing on this. But I did have one question for you. My mother called me this morning out in Indiana, and she said she listened to your show 2 hours yesterday, and you mentioned something about 2018 predictions, and she said you didn't give any reason for it, but she said that Donald Trump would be impeached. And I said, did he follow up with any rationale, any reason, any evidence? And she said, no, I don't think he did. So I said, I'm just going to clarify that with you real quick. If you think he's going to be impeached, and what grounds would he be impeached for?
Well, we're already seeing the Democrats are filing articles of impeachment over very trivial concerns. But we're in a situation right now where Donald Trump doesn't have to have actually done anything wrong. Congress is simply arrogating to itself the right to get rid of him because he's not part of the narcocracy. He's not part of the inner circle. Same reason they went after Judge Roy Moore. But if the Democrats can take control of both houses of Congress, then yeah, they're going to push forward on impeaching Trump.
Well, this is amazing. No real evidence, just they don't like him, and they're going to conjure up something to get rid of him. Amazing. So Mike Pence would go in, and of course they'd probably go after him also, right?
Probably. And again, there was this liberal professor who came out with this ludicrous idea that they would get rid of Trump, get rid of Pence, Mitch McConnell as Speaker of the House would become the president, Hillary Clinton would change parties and would be voted in as the new vice president, and that at that point I wouldn't want to be carrying Mitch's life insurance policy. She has not given up getting that Oval Office by any means that she feels she has to go to.
I agree. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news. Now, Charlie Rose was originally suspended from his show, but now he's been fired outright. Basically, there are now 13 women who are alleging he groped them and walked around nude and made lewd phone calls. And again, it may have happened, but it may not have happened. Again, this is a witch hunt, and everybody wants their 50 minutes of fame. Again, to draw on the experience of the 1990s, during the so-called rape crisis, I mean, women were just making up these incredible stories about rape because they'd get on TV, they'd get on Oprah, they'd get on Donahue, they'd get their name in the newspapers, their picture in the newspapers, and it just spun completely and ridiculously out of control. And I think one good example of just how the hysteria took off happened up in Davis, California, where a woman claimed that she was gang raped by skateboarding teenagers on the grass median of the highway through town. And it got newspaper headlines all over the country, and she was getting all these interviews and talk show requests and everything. The National Organization of Women got involved, and the city council in Davis was literally on the verge of passing a male-only curfew when the story fell apart, because the police were trying to investigate, and she wouldn't reveal who the doctor was she claimed that she'd gone to after the rape, who supposedly would have the evidence of what happened. And finally she said, yeah, I just made it up. So it really it created this climate where accusation equals guilt. And no, accusation equals an accusation. It's not an indictment, it's not a charge, it's not a conviction. And we have to be very, very careful about this. Okay, now, let me just scroll this up a little bit, dealing with all this new equipment here. Now, somebody found this wonderful flashback video where Charlie Rose was at the forefront of the attacks on President Trump for that audio recording about grabbing a woman's nether regions. And it's a reminder that people who are without sin should be casting the first stones. And of course, Trump called a press conference on the tape and had in the guests, the audience, Paula Jones, Kathy Shelton, Juanita Broderick, and Kathleen Wiley. So again, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Or in other words, rocks and glass houses don't go together very well. Now, Huffington Post came out with a piece trying to defend Al Franken and claiming that his victims are partisan liars. And they wound up finally taking the story down as more and more accusers have come forward. But Huffington Post basically resorted to personal attacks. They attacked Leon Tweeden, describing her as a former Playboy playmate who spent half her life nude, or nearly nude, and the other half appearing on shows such as Hannity. And it was clearly yellow journalism. It was not objective. It was not unbiased. And Huffington Post even went on to dismiss the photograph of Al Franken with his hands going toward the Playboy bunny. And it was obviously a joke. She's wearing a flak jacket. But Huffington Post actually came on out and claimed it was staged, saying that she was only playing that she was asleep, and she wanted him to revive her. And they have a quote supposedly from the photographer who took the picture that, yeah, this was all staged and it wasn't really a sexual assault. But there's no credible reporting of the photographer ever saying any such thing, and Huffington Post was forced to retract. So again, we're seeing the corporate media is really self-destructing right before our eyes. Another very interesting video that has surfaced was Kevin Spacey on the Charlie Rose show talking about Bill Clinton's sexcapades. And Of course, it's up in the air which of the three was the biggest sexual harasser. So, we've done enough about the celebrity stories, and now it's time to get into the real news, which of course is Uranium One. And that is heating up. The corporate media doesn't want to talk about it, but apparently this FBI informant has got a lot of very interesting information. He claims to have videotapes, he claims to have photos, and apparently had let the FBI know that this was all going on. That a year before the Obama administration approved the Uranium One deal, there were memos showing that there was this bribery and corruption going on, and Obama and Hillary Clinton approved the deal. Now, the FBI informant is expected to testify before Congress right after the Thanksgiving break, if he's not found in Fort Marcy Park. Oddly enough, though, the Department of Justice is downplaying reports of proof linking Obama and Clinton to the Russian corruption. They're basically out there saying, oh, there won't be anything new in there. It won't shed much light. Don't even bother watching the hearings. And that's a ridiculous thing for the Department of Justice to be saying, because they don't know what this informant, William Campbell, is going to say. They really don't know. But they're trying to discourage people from looking too closely at this, because this Uranium One deal goes all over the place. A lot of people are dirty with this one. This is bigger than Watergate. Now, another article came out from WorldNet Daily, and it's kind of nice to hear, but it basically, the headline is Trump right about something very fishy in Vince Foster's death? And they brought up this story in light of the possible nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court of Brett M. Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh had a role in leading the badly flawed investigation, meaning cover-up, into the death of Vince Foster in July of 1993. See, some parts of that swamp go back a very, very long time. Now, do you remember that UC Riverside student, Edith Macias? She was filmed bragging about stealing another student's Make America Great hat back in September. And apparently she is now facing a year in prison for her crime. And it's just another reminder to all those snowflakes out there. You are not justified in committing assaults and violence just because you don't like the person who won the election. Meanwhile, over at MSNBC, Casey Hunt has apologized for saying the story about Rand Paul's assault, which resulted in 6 broken ribs, was one of her favorite stories. She actually said that on air. Oh, I love the story about Rand Paul getting his ribs broken. And she's apologized for that. We're seeing the corporate media just unravel before our eyes, and not just here in the United States. Apparently, there was a story that came out in the British media that Vladimir Putin is getting tired, and he's thinking about maybe stepping down, and it was portrayed as a scoop. We've got the inside scoop. Putin is getting ready to resign. And it does not stand up to examination, because in Russia, the people around Vladimir Putin are very tight-lipped, unlike here in the United States, where people around Trump are willing to leak classified information to the press left and right. But it turns out the 2 sources that were cited for this story turn out to be what lazy journalists call rent-a-gobs. In other words, they're touted as analysts, but they can be counted on to say what's going on, what the media wants to hear. And one of them, Gleb Pavlovsky, hasn't been in the Kremlin for 6 years. So he's obviously not in a position to have any inside information. But this is what the media went with. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the news here, Newsweek actually came out with an article that is basically comparing Donald Trump to Charles Manson. Now they're saying, no, this really isn't a comparison, but just look. They were both excellent speakers, and they were able to just sway the masses, and I mean, talk about dirty journalism. I think we're really seeing the beginning of the end of the corporate media. The attacks on Roy Moore, I think, were the last desperate attempt to prove to their corporate masters that they're still in control of the minds of America. And that was, of course, after the disaster last year when the corporate media was saying, oh, Hillary's going to win. She's ahead 98 points. She's a shoo-in. She's absolutely going to win. And it turned out it didn't happen. And it looks like the same thing's going to happen with Roy Moore. And so the corporate media, they're in a panic. They're desperate right now because their job is to control what you're thinking. And if they're not able to prove that they can do that anymore, their corporate backers are going to put those checkbooks away because most of these TV news network, large newspapers, they're running in the red. They're losing money. And they don't want to give up those big fat paychecks that they're paid to be such excellent liars. Now, let's turn on over to the war zone. Apparently, as a result of the prolonged war in Syria, 6 years roughly, as many as 1 million children have been orphaned during that war. This is coming from the United Nations, and the UN is warning about the dangers facing children who have lost their parents, lack of education, human trafficking, and, of course, being indoctrinated by armed terrorist groups. Now, many children are living in orphanages being run by local charities both inside Syria and abroad. And so it's just this horrible tragedy that's been visited on these people by the U.S. government just because they wanted Assad out and an obedient U.S. puppet in. Now, the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has congratulated Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon for the great achievement of defeating the Islamic State. So we're already getting these indications. The war in Syria is over. The U.S. has lost. Now, Putin held a surprise meeting with Syria's President Bashar al-Assad and basically kicking off a diplomatic drive this week to outline the terms of the end of the Syrian war. And the two leaders discussed the political process in Syria. And then Putin said that he was going to call Donald Trump by phone later on. And I would certainly love to be a fly on the wall for that phone call. But I probably think it has to do with the comment made the other day by Secretary of Defense Mattis that the U.S. forces will remain in Syria even though ISIS is gone. Because after all, Syria does not want us there. Syria has not given permission for the U.S. to be there. The U.S.'s continued military occupation amounts to an act of aggression. Now, as the Syrian forces clean up the last of the ISIS bases, they keep finding more and more of these chemical weapons. And the whole rationale for saying that Bashar al-Assad gassed his own people last April was the presumption that Bashar al-Assad was the only one to have chemical weapons, that he hadn't surrendered them all in the Russian brokered deal. But obviously, the rebels did have chemical weapons. And earlier on in this fiasco, you had the UN's own chemical weapons inspector saying this is being done by the rebels to frame Bashar al-Assad. Now, we're seeing more response to the Arab League's statement on Hezbollah. And obviously the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has rejected claims that the group is arming rebels in Yemen. That's one of the allegations that was hurled out to it. Lebanon's president rejects the terrorism suggestion as well because the Lebanese president understands Hezbollah is what has been protecting Lebanon from Israel's aggressions for many, many years now. The Palestinian Alliance slammed the Arab League move against the Lebanese Hezbollah, and again saying it's a resistance movement. They're not terrorists. They're trying to defend their homeland from the Israeli aggressions. Now, Netanyahu and Macron are meeting to discuss ideas to stabilize the situation in Lebanon, by which, from Israel's point of view, means we bomb them until they are stable. Okay. So, moving right on here. Along with all the other money that Israel gets from the United States, and it's a huge amount of money, Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is demanding an additional $1.3 billion from the American taxpayer over the Syria situation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're going to take a phone call here from Carol in Idaho. Aloha, Carol. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you. Just want to say you're doing a fantastic job. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I called, something that's on my mind so often is this. Any nation whose military modus operandi is aggression, I could name a couple nations.
Yes.
They should not use the word defense from their Pentagon or any such agency. Get my drift?
Yeah, it's the Department of Offense. We have not had to defend ourselves against an invasion since, back during the Civil War when Europe was coming to the aid of the Confederacy.
God in heaven. It's just such deception. We were more honest, Michael, back, I guess Second World War, prior to Second World War, when our Pentagon was called the War Department. We need to go back and call ourselves the War Department because there is no, as you say, there's no defense involved. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And let's just do this. Okay. All right. So now, getting on back to the news here. The U.S. in Syria, they're still trying to claim they have some kind of a right to be there, where basically the United States does not in fact have permission from the United Nations to be intervening in Syria. And Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova is saying, we're surprised to hear a statement made by U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis when talking to the U.S. media representatives on November 13th that the U.S. armed forces are in Syria with the permission of the United Nations, because the Security Council is the only agency under the UN Charter that is entitled to take decisions on using military force. Now, as it turns out, what Mattis is trying to twist into UN permission was a UN resolution regarding the war on terror and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the problem is ISIS and Al-Qaeda are now out of Syria. So even that flimsy rationale is no longer in effect. And Mattis is out there saying, well, they could come back. We have to stay here just in case they try and come back. No, actually, Syria did a pretty good job of getting rid of them. It's time for the U.S. to get out of Syria and admit they lost this one. But they're going to go on pouring money, resources, people into Syria, the same reason they're doing the same in Afghanistan. They're never going to win it. They just don't want to have to say we lost this one, because it would pull the momentum out from the larger plan of a world conquest. Now, over in Lebanon, Hezbollah forces are on high combat readiness to confront possible Israeli attacks. And the situation in the Middle East is developing. The expected conflict between the resistance and the Saudi-Israeli bloc is the current center of attention. And it does look like Saudi Arabia is trying to stir up a major kerfuffle in the region. Now, up in Afghanistan, U.S. airstrikes are targeting Taliban opium labs. And apparently they used F-22 stealth fighters and B-52 Stratofortresses to attack opium labs in the northern part of the Helmand province, probably because they're cutting into the CIA's action. If anybody's going to make money off of Afghan opium, it's going to be the U.S. government here. Now then, it turns out, finally, the International Criminal Court is opening an investigation into the CIA black sites in Afghanistan and other areas. Now, this is a very broad-ranged investigation into war crimes and violations in Afghanistan on all parties, but they are including a focus on the Central Intelligence Agency and its secret detention facilities, where they used enhanced interrogation techniques, which is a euphemism for torture. And they had techniques like waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation, humiliation. So the International Criminal Court is finally taking a look at that. Now, interestingly enough, CBS 60 Minutes, and I want to back up here a little bit and remind everybody that CBS 60 Minutes is not always fair, balanced, and objective. And this goes back to Bill Clinton and his issues with Jennifer Flowers. And 60 Minutes did an interview with Jennifer Flowers when Bill Clinton was running for president. And they basically edited the segment to discredit her, make her look terrible, to help Bill Clinton. And the executive producer of CBS 60 Minutes at that time, Don Hewitt, is actually on videotape admitting, yes, we did this to help Bill Clinton. So, with that in the background here, 60 Minutes did a report on the crisis in Yemen last Sunday and pointed out, if you keep going like you're going, there's not going to be anybody left. All the children are going to be dead. The program has been called out, however, for ignoring the fact, not mentioning the fact that the U.S. is providing crucial material support for Saudi Arabia's atrocities in Yemen. And of course, what's really going on is the U.S. is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy in order to get a war going, knowing the American people are sick and tired of war. We don't want any more. So the U.S. plan is to use other countries to go out and do the dirty work for them. So the U.S. government can say, well, no, we're not really at war in Yemen. We're not really at war against Iran. That's Saudi Arabia is doing that. We've got nothing to do with that. But a lot of people are asking, and there was even an article in the original antiwar.com, why are we helping Saudi Arabia destroy Yemen? And the situation there is absolutely untenable. They're dealing with mass starvation. There are now 3 cities that no longer have working water supply systems. And children are starving to death. And there's still that epidemic of cholera all over the country, which may have been a biological weapons attack. But what's really going on here is that several years ago, the U.S. had what they called a successful intervention in Yemen. They kicked out the legitimate government and they installed a puppet regime. But the people of Yemen do not want to live under puppet rule. And that's what the current fight is all about. The people of Yemen basically were on the very verge of throwing out their puppet rulers and bringing back their own government. And that's when the U.S. got Saudi Arabia to go on in and start slamming those people. And Saudi Arabia has been doing this for almost 2 years now, I think. And they still haven't succeeded, which tells you 2 things. The people of Yemen are showing tremendous courage in the face of adversity. They're standing up for what they want, self-determination, a government of their own choosing. And the second thing we take away from this is that Saudi Arabia may have a lot of money, and they have a lot of weapons they can buy with that money, but they're not really an effective military. And that is something that should be taken into consideration as we get more and more comments about going after Iran. Now, over the last week, we saw several stories hinting at close relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and in the fact that there have been secret connections, secret communication going back a very long time, possibly, maybe, as far as 9/11 itself. But the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia has now issued a formal statement saying that there are no relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. He's now officially denied the story. And he goes on to say the Arab conditions are clear, 2 states with a Palestinian state whose capital is East Jerusalem. So this is supposed to negate the earlier report that Saudi Arabia was willing to throw Palestine under a bus to achieve these close relations with Israel in terms of using Israel's military to go after Iran. But at this point, I think it can be safely said that Mohammed bin Salman, the current crown prince, soon to be, imminently to be the king of Saudi Arabia, is turning out to be a useful idiot for American interests. And if the United States and Israel achieve their goals, he'll be held aloft as a hero. But if they fail, as they failed in Afghanistan and Syria, then Mohammed bin Salman is going to look like a fool for having gone along, and that may provoke a change of ruler in Saudi Arabia. So he's taken a big, big chance. Now, as you know, the Palestinians have taken a case to the International Criminal Court regarding war crimes committed by Israelis in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. And the Trump administration is now threatening, they're blackmailing Palestine. They're saying that unless the charges are withdrawn, that the Palestine Liberation Organization mission in Washington, D.C. will be shut down. They'll close it down. They'll lock it up. Personally, I would almost think that Palestine would be better off letting the mission be closed and proceeding with the charges before the International Criminal Court. Because what we have here is the U.S. government aiding and abetting crimes against humanity, war crimes. Kind of makes you wonder what side they're on. And this is reinforced because apparently at the United Nations, the UNGA Third Committee overwhelmingly passed a Russian-introduced resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism. And the U.S. voted against it. So did Ukraine. And this was simply a resolution against whitewashing and attempting to glorify Nazi ideology. And obviously Israel would be fully on board with that. But just because it's Russia, the U.S. and Ukraine voted against it. Sort of getting back for Russia's veto on the U.S. plan to send more inspectors into Syria to try and frame up Assad for the gas attacks. The U.S. also blocked a UN Security Council statement condemning the shelling of Russia's embassy in Syria. And Russia responded to that by saying they'll continue to fight terrorists in Syria and will contribute to the establishment of peace and security in the Syrian Arab Republic. This is from Fyodor Strzenovsky. I mispronounced that. So, they're really starting to act very childish up there at the United Nations. I mean, Nikki Haley's up there saying, what do you want me to say today? What do you want me to say today? Now, something is going on over in Lugansk, and early today there were reports of military people in downtown Lugansk trying to surround some of the government buildings. And more recently, we're finding out what's going on. Apparently, there was an attempt to fire the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Igor Kormet, over his mishandling of the department. And apparently Kormet is trying to basically, by force, get himself back into the government. So there's actually now a fight for control of the government of Lugansk. Over in Somalia, yes, we're in Somalia, U.S. airstrike kills more than 100 al-Shabaab militants, and who knows how many innocent civilian bystanders. But yeah, the U.S. is all over the place. I mean, technically, this is already a world war, because U.S. military doctrine says a world war is any war in which you are fighting on two fronts on at least two different continents. And we're there. Fighting in Africa, making stink face with Russia in Europe, and we're fighting in Asia. Now, retired Navy Lieutenant Commander Gregory Keeley has come on out with a statement saying the U.S. military should simply choke North Korea into submission. And what he is proposing is a naval blockade against North Korea until they surrender their nuclear weapons program. Now, there is a flaw with that. Actually, there's a couple. The first one is that a naval blockade is an act of war. They're doing one around Yemen as well. Second, North Korea, because of years of sanctions and isolation, is actually quite self-sufficient. There isn't a whole heck of a lot coming in through the seaports, and a naval blockade is not going to stop North Korea from trading with their other trading partners like China, using trucks and aircraft. So it's kind of a harebrained idea, but it shows just how desperate the thinking is among the war hawks. They just want to get the war going. They're desperate to get the war going before the economy collapses, because if the economy collapses and they don't have a war to blame it on, then we the people are going to point the finger of blame at Wall Street and Washington, D.C., where it rightly belongs. Now, China has just announced that they are starting to commission, to put into actual service, their latest missile, the Dongfeng 41, that can reach anywhere on the globe, travels at Mach 10, and it carries multiple warheads. It's a MIRV, and it even has defensive systems like flares to fool enemy defense systems. So that one, apparently they've been testing it for 8 years, and apparently they're happy with the tests, and they're getting ready to actually put it on out there. Another reason to not let this war go any further than it already has. Now, one of the things that we get lied to a lot is the cost of the war. And we certainly found that out in Vietnam where, it's only this much, it's only this much. And then after it was all over, we found out how much it really was. But right now, the current estimate is it's $5.6 trillion has been spent on 16 years of U.S. global wars. 5.6 trillion with a T. And just imagine if that money had been spent here in the United States, rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding our industry, rebuilding our economy, we would have been much better off. Because the economy is in terrible, terrible shape. Even analysts over at Bank of America, specifically Michael Hartnett, is out there predicting that it's all going to start coming apart next year, and there may be a flash crash even before the end of the year, meaning there'll be a crash and then a recovery, then the big crash. And by the way, that was the pattern in 1929, where the big stock market crash happened in October, but it had been preceded by a smaller crash in August. And they came out of the crash in August and they just said, everything's okay. We've had our crash, we've had our correction, nothing can go wrong. And boy, did it. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And Adam Taggart is out there with a cautionary note about retirement plans. And right now, a lot of people, especially the baby boomers, are very nervous about retirement, whether there's really going to be one, or if it's just become a fiction that lures us on forward. And as we've already documented many times on the show, Social Security is in serious trouble, because back when Bill Clinton was president, he borrowed a big chunk of that cash buildup for the baby boomer retirements, and he spent it as general revenue, and that's where he got his magic federal budget surplus. And they replaced that cash with a special issue treasury bond, which now they don't have the money to redeem. So that's really in a bit of a mess. And so Taggart is going on about the introduction of personal retirement savings plans, IRAs, were created in 1974, and then the 401ks were created in 1980, and they're basically these defined contribution plans, and the future payout of the plan is variable. You don't know what you're going to get, and it's a function of how much of their income the worker directs into the fund over their career, as well as the market return on the fund's investments, which means if there's a major stock market correction, most of those 401ks and IRAs are actually going to be worthless. Now, the idea was this got companies off the hook for providing company pensions. You're not getting a pension from your company? No worry. Open an IRA account, create your own personal pension fund. And if you're concerned about mismanagement of the IRA, then get a 401k, where supposedly you can decide how your retirement money is invested. But again, the key decisions controlling that retirement payout are the ones being made on Wall Street. And the stock numbers or the stock market numbers are still up there really very high. Huzzah, huzzah, everything must be good. Craig Hemke is out there saying the reality is that 90% of the volume being seen on the New York Stock Exchange is coming from the high-frequency trading computers swapping positions back and forth to each other. Now, if a human broker was doing it, they'd be calling it churning, which is just a way of piling up transactions in order to bill their clients for the transaction fees. But that's what's really going on. These computers are ramping up the market, and they're not bringing up the underlying value of the stock itself. The market is hideously overvalued, and that was true also back in 1929. Now, turning back over to Saudi Arabia, very interesting little article came out of Zero Hedge, 100 billion reasons to have non-reportable assets. And it's talking about the realities in Saudi Arabia, where they're in a cash crunch because of that misguided oil price war with Russia, and the reality that they may actually be running out of oil in the very near future, that they're getting less and less out of those wells. More about this after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Just dealing with all this hardware and software problems.
Yeah, man, that's what happens with computers, Mike. It's just like never ends, right? Hey,
yeah.
Hey, Mike,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Hey, Mike, with Saudi Arabia, with like, you know, he created this uncertainty, like in his own country with the purge. Nobody's going to want to invest there, you know, like with that whole 2030 building this mega city with that robot that was just a prop, basically. You know, like the Wahhabist is never going to allow to have all these nightclubs and stuff. You know what I mean? Like Dubai has, or stuff like that.
Well, Salman is already talking about moving Saudi Arabia to a more moderate Islam that would allow things like women can wear bikinis on the beach kind of a situation. But the problem is that this so-called purge has turned out to be a shakedown, where they've simply rounded up the richest men in Saudi Arabia and said, in exchange for 70% of your wealth, we'll let you go again. And so basically, Salman is basically stealing from his own people. It's sort of civil forfeiture writ large. And it's because they're in a cash crunch. And you're right, it is absolutely going to kill foreign investment in Saudi Arabia if they think King Salman is just going to grab it at some point down the road.
But people, I mean, Mike, the petrodollar, you know, exists because of the U.S. and, you know, Britain involved in that to keep it running, along with France and, you know, Saudi Arabia. But don't people realize Saudi Arabia is on its way out? Iran had all these sanctions on it for how long, Mike? They have oil in Iran. They have the potential, you know what I mean? Like that, it basically hasn't been touched as much as Saudi Arabia. And the same with Russia. Russia has a lot of untapped potential because of, you know, in the 90s and all that, and it slowed them down in terms of like, you know, drilling with more high-tech means at the time. But these two countries, you know, and China formed the Petro Yuan, you know, and throw in Venezuela with the largest oil reserves in the world. I mean, this whole thing has to do with a shift. You know, I mean, like it or not, it's coming within a month because of the you know, oil for gold, you know, contracts coming up next month.
Yes.
So I mean, you know, it's basically, it's not going to happen at once, but the whole thing is, it's going to probably take $1 trillion at least out of this U.S. economy because we won't be making any money as being getting part of the action. But that's just the beginning. I mean, the more contracts they fulfill, it's just another, you know, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. You know, I mean, and Mike, you had the gentleman from Canada called Friday. Like, I have to totally disagree with him. No, dropping the corporate tax rate is not going to bring investment back in this country because they already have the loopholes and they got cheap labor overseas. They're not going to come back here and build a new factory and pay people $15, $20 an hour. That's not going to happen. You know, they're not going to pay you $20 an hour to build widgets, put together widgets. I mean,
It was like I told the caller at the time, there's nothing left to work with here in the U.S. Our factories are all emptied, corroded, rusted hulks. Our infrastructure is very poor and not supporting any kind of development. And our current younger generation, for the most part, don't have the skills to be good workers. If you look at the snowflakes, they don't even have the mindset to be a good worker. We've lost our work ethic. And so it's going to be very difficult for somebody to start a business here. And for those corporations that are already multinational, they're going to be saying, why bother? There are other countries where it's going to be less expensive. The people are better educated. They've got the skills to engage in a manufacturing economy, and they got a good work attitude. So why go to the U.S.?
Don't you find it ironic how all those rotted factories are still sitting in the rotting inner cities? Like, it's not worth tearing them down. That's what I'm saying. They're not going to be building factories here for, where they're at is where they're at already. This is a declining empire.
Yes.
If the economy was doing so great, stock markets, obviously everybody knows, is rigged, printing money out of thin air. Corporations, borrow cheap money, 0%, buy their stocks, stock values go up. But I'm saying, Mike, there's no investment coming back to this country. I mean, it's just, it's horrible. I mean, it's just a slow drain. And the inner cities are rotting away. I mean, they got Baltimore, 3 cops got shot in the head or whatever. I mean, the cities are becoming like, they're pretty bad. I mean, at night, nobody wants to go out, Mike.
They're very bad. We're seeing inner city rot here, and it's because of the economy, and people are getting desperate. And of course, crime goes up. If you can't find a job to earn food for your family, you're going to go out and steal it. And then on top of that, you have the crime that's being brought on in with all these migrants and refugees and illegal immigrants. The so-called unaccompanied children are turning out to be members of the MS-13 gang. This nation is being destroyed from within, as Abraham Lincoln predicted would be its ultimate demise. And it's being destroyed because of decisions made by that central federal government.
And all we got left is a warfare state, Mike. This is it. I mean, this is all we got to offer the world now. Is war. Yeah. It's a warfare economy, Yeah. Oh, yeah. You think you're going to take? And then remember, by the way, Putin's going to meet with Erdogan and Rouhani right in the next few days, I believe.
Over at Sochi.
Yeah. So that's hey, shift's coming, man. It's not my fault, not your fault. It's your government's fault. This has been a long time in the making, man. And, people better get buckled up, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I'm a little curious about this. I think it's called Belt and Roads with China. How would this? I mean, I think it's building the Chinese infrastructure. And I had heard Trump was, planning on sending some building crews. How would this, A, affect the United States, and B, is this a rebranding of TPP?
No, you're confusing two different things. TPP is a free trade treaty, but if trade was free, you don't really need a treaty. The infrastructure buildup in China, they were going to call it the New Silk Road. Now they're just calling it the Central Belt. And it is this massive project to build rail lines and highways following the original Silk Road route to connect China with Russia and then eventually on to Europe. And they've already opened up the first section for traffic use in China. And what it will do is it will allow Chinese goods to reach Russia and Europe in just a few days, much, much shorter than putting it on a cargo ship and sending it around the long way through the Suez Canal. And so obviously the impact is going to be a tremendous loss of business for shipping companies, including American shipping companies. And because of the shortness of time, more agricultural produce is going to be able to be exported by China to Russia and Europe, and they'll be less interested in buying our GMO agriculture. So it's a very good thing for China to be doing. I mean, they're building infrastructure. They're making deals, and as you said before, the U.S. all we have to offer the world anymore is war. because we've let everything else rot away.
No, I totally, yeah, and it was my misunderstanding with TPP and this whole thing. It just was scratching my head. It doesn't seem like, when Trump, went to Asia and talked to Xi Jinping, or I think that's his name.
Yes.
I wondered, is there anything that we could invest in with this to bring money back to the States? And it sounds like no, it's more or less helping them in their infrastructure. Now, if we could get China to invest in American infrastructure, that would be great. But I agree with Dustin that, the American quote-unquote empire is falling. Empires fall and empires rise. And I think it's time for the American empire, I hate to say this, but to go bye-bye. I mean, with the corruption and everything that's going on, Uranium Gate,
yes.
and the email server, it's just a matter of time until somebody, as in Hillary, goes down and spills the beans and everything. So I like your idea with the Soviet-style collapse more than a civil war in this country. It seems like it would be less bloody. I hate to see either one of them happen, but something's got to happen, and then we, the people, need to pick the pieces up and at the end and reform our own government like the Soviets did.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we're headed right now. We're showing all the symptoms of an empire that is in decline, heading for collapse, and that includes what's going on with Roy Moore and the corporate media that's self-destructing before our eyes. There's nothing left to work with, and the key reason is because those who are in control of the government and the corporations, all they can see is their next big paycheck. And it has become totally corrupted. Nobody is in a position to turn the system around. We all hoped Trump was going to turn the system around and start that long, slow climb back to being a true republic with a democratically elected government, but Trump's been compromised. The swamp got him. And so at this point, there's nothing left for this government but eventual collapse. And I think it's going to happen real soon.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, sir, you have a great and wonderful day, and, man, I hope it don't get any more bizarre on you.
I wouldn't place money on that one. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our affiliates who rejoined our network here. And, again, for those who are checking in wondering why BAM User isn't working, we had to put in a new computer here to run Skype to connect with RBN, and for some reason, even though it was working earlier in the day, the audio going out to BAM User quit as soon as we started Skype, and I'm going to have to sort that out after today's show, so that's where we are on that. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Sherry in Fredericksburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How about maybe some sick minds want to turn America into a playground. We've got great climate. We've got forests and lakes and rivers and even deserts. And there's places for skiing and homes for the wealthy. Land, you can purchase your own land and grow and have cattle, beef, agriculture, beef. Turn it into a playground. It would make a beautiful playground for the wealthy, for the Europeans, foreigners.
But then you've got that problem having to get rid of all those pesky Americans standing around thinking it's their country.
That's right. And good luck trying to do that, because we're not going to let them do it, I don't think.
Yeah.
But anyway, that could be one option that maybe they're mulling over. I just want to throw that in.
I don't think they want to turn the entire United States into a playground, because so much of it is not beautiful. But there are very nice places in the United States which have already been acquired by the ultra-wealthy to be their playgrounds. There are other places in the world, the same thing is going on, where they don't have as many pesky laws. I mean, look at Jeff Epstein, after he got busted for what he was doing in Florida, he built himself a new home down in the Caribbean, where there aren't any cops coming around.
Yeah, things would have to change. Well, what are they going to do? What are they doing getting rid of all those horses? They have these wild horses out there. I mean, this is a beautiful thing. Why are they wanting to clear that land out?
Well,
have you heard about that?
Yeah, I've heard about that. We talked about it yesterday. The issue is that the ranching industry in the area sees the wild horses as competition for resources. So they simply want them out there. Yeah, resources. They're drinking water from the streams. They're grazing on the grass. Right now the market for horse meat isn't all that hot. They're just simply saying they want them killed.
Yeah, so they can't have a little piece of this great, vast land for themselves. To
Only
just
if they can
see
shoot back.
something wild running free, huh?
Yeah.
It just seems a shame.
Wild running free, that's definitely becoming extinct in this planet.
That's right. Okay, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let
bet.
you go. And getting on back to the news. So Saudi Arabia is basically pillaging its own people, trying to keep their books balanced. And I guess Saudi Arabia, like the United States, is thinking if they get into a big war with Iran, the Saudi people won't be paying attention to the decline of their nation and their living standards. Question being asked, all these countries are in trouble with the pensions because it's all one giant Ponzi scheme, and all Ponzi schemes eventually collapse. And they're looking whether Spain might be the first nation within the EU to default on pensions. And that won't be a problem. We'll just have another taxpayer bailout. Just keep taking money away from the taxpayers, and then we give some of it back. Now, apparently, this financing company in Germany, Wintershall, is unfazed by the new sanctions that are being proposed against Russia and various other countries, and they're willing to continue participating in the financing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. So the Nord Stream 2 is on. It is going to be built. And that, of course, will bypass Ukraine. And that, of course, is going to make a lot of people in Europe a little bit happier. And actually takes away one of the reasons for having gone into Ukraine in the first place. So let's get on over to what's going on in Germany. As you know, Angela Merkel, following her election, gave herself a 2-month deadline to form a new coalition government because her party did not win enough seats to constitute the entire government. That's the way the system works over there in Germany. And she failed to get her deadline, and apparently the other two parties who had come in with sizable votes in the election simply walked out of the talks. And apparently the breaking point was Merkel's insistence on maintaining the open borders. And the other two parties are adamantly opposed to it, as are most of the German people. And so now they're talking about snap elections that are coming on up. And Angela Merkel is out there saying that, yes, she will run again in this new snap election. So we'll see what happens. I don't think she'll do as well next time as she did last time. Now, Marine Le Pen, who was just narrowly defeated by Macron in their last election, is now saying that France's two leading right-wing parties, the Front National and the Republicans, should form a strategic political alliance to counter centrist President Emmanuel Macron's radical reform agenda. Well, he postures himself as a centrist, but he's definitely a very liberal in terms of his political philosophy. And again, there were allegations of massive election fraud going on in that election as well. I'm beginning to think there isn't a country on this planet that has an actual honest election system anywhere. Some are just better than others here. Now, as you know, the Brexit talks are continuing, and they're not really going anywhere. The EU wants a massive divorce payment, even though there's no mention of such a thing in the European Union founding documents. And former Conservative MP Sir Gerald Haworth has hit out at the EU for failing to remember Britain's sacrifices for European freedom, such as standing up to the Nazis. And, of course, the attitude of the Brussels is, well, what have you done for us this week? And that they have no gratitude whatsoever. Again, it's all about the money, because when Britain leaves the EU, there goes much of the EU's funding, because Germany and Britain together have shouldered the load for all of the other EU member states which are in serious economic trouble. And Germany certainly is not going to want to carry that load all by themselves. Okay, we're going to take a break here for some commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. A little update from Roy Moore's campaign. You remember when these ridiculous allegations against him first surfaced, and they've all been discredited. In fact, there was another one of his accusers. Her story fell apart when it turned out that she didn't actually live where she said she lived at the time. So it's all coming apart. But the Republican National Committee, who wanted the other GOP candidate to win in the primaries, and they're acting like spoiled children, they cut off all financial support to Judge Roy Moore. And it turns out that it hasn't had an effect, because Roy Moore has managed to raise $1 million since the RNC ban. So the people of Alabama, they know what's going on. They're not being fooled. Now, getting on back to Europe and issues of immigration, a story coming out of Citizens Free Press quotes a report saying that 90% of rapes in Sweden are committed by migrants. And we reported yesterday that rape rates in Sweden have hit an all-time high. In fact, crime in all areas have hit an all-time high. And yet the official position of the Swedish government is, well, you know, if you're going to report this in the media, you don't mention whether they're migrants, you don't mention their ethnicity, just say a rape happened, a robbery happened, there was a murder and a stabbing, and leave it as that. Now, getting on to the world of the liberal snowflakes, just when you think they can't get any sillier, they get sillier. Now, if you're as old as I am, you probably remember the comedian Steve Martin, and he's also a fabulous banjo player. And he did this song in 1978 called King Tut, and it was a joke. And he did a rendition during a live performance on Saturday Night Live on April 22nd, 1978, and the tune was a hit. It sold a lot. It actually helped popularize Tutankhamun. At the same time, there was a touring exhibit that was in the U.S. that was all over, and people went to see it because, oh yeah, this is King Tut. And it was a silly, funny song. It was an absolute hit. However, students attending Reed College in Portland, Oregon, watching the Saturday Night Live skit, and they're triggered. Oh my goodness, we're triggered. Steve Martin had engaged in cultural appropriation. Oh my goodness, it's horrible. It must be banned. Well, boy, I can hardly wait to see their reaction when somebody plays the Bengals Walk Like an Egyptian to them. I mean, this is way beyond silly right now. And what I want to know, and I'm sure the parents of these students want to know, is how teaching students to be offended by everything is going to help them get a job after they graduate and pay back those student loans. These kids weren't born this way, hypersensitive, fragile, delicate little butterflies. They're being conditioned to be this way. And again, I think part of the objective here is to get everybody so nervous about what they're saying and doing, so worried about the words they're using, that they're not looking beyond at the larger picture of what's going on in this country with the escalation of the war and a fragile economy that's trembling at the edge of collapse. Not to mention Uranium Gate, Primary Gate, Dossier Gate, and all the other gates that we're being distracted from. Now, speaking of distraction, obviously this firestorm of sexual allegations is a distraction. The media are just grabbing onto it. They don't want to report anything else other than how this celebrity or this politician has now been accused of sexual dalliances. And again, we have to be careful. Many of these allegations are going to turn out to be false, as certainly seems to be the case with Roy Moore. But on the other hand, I think there's another aspect, and that is the American people are getting an education. They're starting to realize that these icons that are presented to us as being noble people that we should seek to emulate, that they're not really nice people at all. And we shouldn't emulate them. We shouldn't hold them up as examples to our children. But power does corrupt. We all know that to be true. And people in these high positions, they think they can get away with it. And again, that may be because 9 out of 10 times they do get away with it. They grab a woman and she says, oh yes, let's do it. That's a reality too. And I saw that in Hollywood. So after a while, that intermittent reinforcement can lead a person into just a series of bad behaviors. And everybody seems to have known this was going on, but it only gets hauled.
Lender has gone out.
Okay. Okay, we had something happen there. We just changed our show clock, and I guess, okay, how much time do I have before the commercial break? Okay. All right, so we'll be back. We're going to try and beat some of these technical gremlins into submission, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to this political correctness issue, and we reported on this story a little while ago, but I wanted to mention it again because I've had some thoughts about it. And basically, there is this school that has now banned students from having best friends. And supposedly this is to prevent students who don't have a best friend from feeling left out, to save them from feelings of exclusion. Well, this is just going to create more isolation between those kids. If they're not allowed to go and form friendships, how are they going to learn social skills? You know, the fact of the matter is that the liberals have created this fantasy world, but that's all it is. It's a fantasy. It doesn't really exist. And yet they're out there just attacking anybody who doesn't want to become part of the fantasy. It's almost like it's a cult or a religion. And all of it is based on an intellectual fraud. Liberals believe that if you control the environment, that you will control what is inside people's heads. That we are born with a blank mind, that we have nothing from our birth. And this is all based on a book titled Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead, who was lionized as a liberal icon. And the idea was that Margaret Mead succeeded in finding in Samoa a culture in which young people transitioned from childhood to adulthood without the emotional trauma that we normally associate as being part of adolescence. But again, it was a fraud. If you read Mead's book, she makes a lot of mistakes, and other researchers have taken it apart. In her book, she writes that Samoa was sexually promiscuous society, because Hawaii was at that same time. But when you look at the separation of the islands in the Pacific, each one has their own culture, their own civilization, their own rules, and Samoans are highly monogamous. So that was one big mistake that you could point to. And it turns out all Margaret Mead did to conduct her research was she made friends with 2 Samoan girls and just talked to them with very leading questions. And the Samoan girls, out of politeness, told Margaret Mead what Margaret Mead obviously wanted to hear, not realizing that Mead was writing a book that would change the political structure of liberalism. But Mead went down there to basically find and prove a pre-existing desired outcome, that it was possible for people to grow up without going through the emotional traumas. But it is in fact a fraud. And that's why all of these liberal projects have been such epic failures. No matter how much you have unisex clothing and you try and create this environment where gender does not exist, girls are going to be girls and boys are going to be boys. And if you put them in a room full of assorted toys, the boys are going to go for things with gears and cranks and stuff on them, and the girls are going to go for something else. Because we do, in fact, carry with us an emotional heritage from 1 million years of evolution as human beings. And each of us is a unique individual that is a product of those aspects we're born with, coupled with our life experience, which is unique for every one of us. But the liberals have built this entire idea that all they need is enough control over everybody, and they will make us all happy little snowflakes like they are. Except we can see with our own eyes they're not happy at all. They're very frustrated. And again, you look at this story about how colleges seem more interested in teaching students how to be offended by everything around them. And you come to understand that these kids are ill prepared to go out into the real world and deal with the job market. The colleges are out there trying to create a climate where nobody's feelings are hurt, that nobody is going to be triggered, that there's no adversity whatsoever. But that's not the real world. When you get into a job, when you get into a business, you're going to be dealing with competition from your coworkers, from other businesses, and these kids really aren't prepared to deal with it. I keep wondering, whatever happened to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me, because now in the liberal minds, words are weapons. Words have so much power. And, it's really funny. Many, many years ago, as you know, there was this TV show, Dog the Bounty Hunter, and it was shot here in Hawaii. And there was a big stink because Dog the Bounty Hunter had used the N-word, not on the air, not in public, in a private phone conversation where the other party had recorded it and just wanted to hurt Dog, and went on out and said, oh my goodness, he used the N-word. And Dog the Bounty Hunter's show was taken off the air. And then it was brought back, and I had the very good fortune of being invited to be part of this press conference and opportunity to interview. And I interviewed Dog and a lot of the other people who were there, and I kept asking them the same question over and over again. Are we giving too much power to words? Are we giving away our own power to words, where we let them control us and trigger us? And it seems today the situation is just far, far worse. And you have to wonder, what's going on with our entire culture and our educational system. So we have this story from the Daily Mail, and I don't know why we have to go to the Daily Mail in Great Britain to read about what's going on in Philadelphia. But the story basically is that they have had 45 teachers resign this year between July and October, and more have announced their resignations because of the violence in the classrooms by the students. And this includes as early as the first grade, where teachers are saying they're being kicked, punched, scratched. One teacher had a student physically restrain them in front of the other students. How do these kids come to understand that this is acceptable behavior? Where are the parents in all of this? And I don't know, are all these kids drugged on out with ADHD medications? I sometimes worry if we are not, in fact, pharmaceutically driving ourselves insane. Now, we've talked before about the link between prescription antidepressants and mass violence. Almost all of the mass shooters, the gun grabbers, are wagging at us. We're either on or withdrawing from those medications, including the guy in Las Vegas. He was on diazepam, which can lead to feelings of paranoia. But it's not just mass violence. That gets the headline. But there are other symptoms as well. Road rage, domestic violence, and we actually did a study right here at whatreallyhappened.com where we took a graph of the per capita introduction of these prescription psychiatric medications into the American market, and we overlaid it with a graph of the increasing per capita incidence of domestic violence, and they lined up. So, looking at this idea of classrooms in Philadelphia where the students are physically abusing their teacher, you know something has gone wrong with education. When I was in school, the idea of assaulting your teacher, that was just so far out there. And if you did assault your teacher, you'd get a trip to the principal's office and a really good paddling. In theory, I never saw it happen. But something has gone very, very wrong. All right, let's get into some science and technology. This story is a little scary. There's an article over in the Washington Times, and apparently down in Texas, the police are adopting a technology called predictive DNA imaging or phenotyping. And the idea is if they have a sample of DNA from a crime scene, they run it through this system, and the system will create an image of what they think the person is going to look like. And this is a product from Parabon Nanolabs, and they're claiming they can accurately predict what a suspect or victim looks like based on the sample of their DNA. This is not a joke. Apparently, other police departments across the country are starting to use this. Now, the product itself is called Snapshot. It's a DNA forensic analysis service that claims that they can take a DNA sample and give you what the person looks like. Now, the New York Times has pointed out that Parabon has not published any information in peer-reviewed journals to validate their claims. Now, two things occur to me. If you don't know the age of the suspect or the victim, you may get an image that is years out of reality. And second, what about people who are wearing makeup or who've dyed their hair or have had corrective surgery? Or maybe they had an accident and now they've got a scar. That's not going to show up in the DNA. This is going to lead to the arrest of innocent people. I don't see that this is going to be any more accurate than facial recognition. In fact, I would see it's probably going to be less accurate than facial recognition. Now, a while back, we mentioned that there were outbreaks of hepatitis A, first in San Diego, and then in Los Angeles. And it's spreading rapidly, especially among the homeless population. But apparently it's now up in Salt Lake City, and health officials are saying this outbreak is expected to last months. So even our health system is breaking down. Now here's a story. This is coming out of Blacklisted News. We've been talking about fracking, the dangers of fracking, where they're pumping these very toxic, radioactive, carcinogenic cocktails down into the ground to dissolve and fracture the rock to harvest oil and gas. And it's not producing the volume of oil and gas that everybody wanted. And there's been a lot of very obvious environmental damage as a result. We've all seen the videos of people holding a lighter to their water tap and it bursts into flame. We know that the fracking fluid doesn't stay deep in the ground, which was the original promise. And we know that because of the fracturing, large amounts of methane gas are leaking to the surface, and that's what's causing these fish die-offs in lakes and ponds and streams. Because as the methane percolates through the water, it's going to decompose and combine with the free oxygen that's in the water, and the fish are going to suffocate. So this story is basically coming on out where apparently officials were caught forcing state scientists to alter findings to cover up the link between fracking and earthquakes. And this, of course, happened in Oklahoma, which is the most drastic example of how fracking can cause an upsurge in seismic activity. Prior to fracking, Oklahoma hardly had any earthquakes at all, and they had a total of 639 in 2016. We don't have numbers for this year, obviously, yet. But apparently in a deposition last month, this individual, Austin Holland, the former lead seismologist for the state of Oklahoma, came on out and stated that Larry Grillo, former dean of Oklahoma University's Mewborn College of Earth and Energy, and Randy Keller, the former director of the Oklahoma Geological Survey, pressured him to alter his findings to be more favorable to the fracking companies. And because of this incident, Holland left his position at Oklahoma University and the Oklahoma Geological Survey. And he's understandably very angry about this because as a scientist, he doesn't feel that his work should be subject to editing by political hacks. And more importantly is the fact that while these Oklahoma earthquakes are small, they're still causing minor damage. And you can't rule out the possibility of a larger quake somewhere down the road, all being caused by this fracking activity. And it's not like they didn't know that this was going to happen because back in 29 Palms on the Marine base there, some years ago, they pumped wastewater that they couldn't get rid of anywhere else down to an earthquake fault, and they triggered a swarm of small quakes. And when they stopped pumping, the quakes went away. Remember the quake that damaged the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C.? That one was thought to be linked to fracking. So, again, the mindset of corporations and government that think it's okay to toxify the drinking water and the environment and along the way cause earthquakes just to get a little bit more oil and gas. And of course the real failure of it is they're not getting the volume of oil and gas that they promised that they were going to get. So there's more downside than upside here. Speaking of toxic water, the CDC is now confirming that most U.S. drinking water is contaminated. Some places are better than others. We tested the water here on Oahu. We actually have very good water coming out of our faucets. It's very hard, which makes sense. We're sucking it out from the middle of an extinct volcano. But if you want to check your water, and I think maybe it's time that you did, you can go on eBay and you can get a water testing kit. It's a one-time only test, and it tests for a wide variety of things: metals contamination, biological contamination, water hardness, a bunch of stuff. Kits run about $30, and it's definitely worth it if you are concerned. And what we're seeing here, we've seen it in Flint, Michigan, we're seeing it in all these other cities, there doesn't really seem to be a desire to spend the necessary money to clean up the water systems. What we're seeing is a push for people to buy bottled water from the water providing companies who are just sucking out fresh water from the aquifers for pennies per tank car, some on expired permits, and they put it in the bottle and they sell it, and it makes money. Next, it's going to be air. They'll let the air pollution and smog get so bad, you'll have to actually have an air booth. They've had these in Japan. When Japan was still dealing with its heavy air pollution, they had air booths. You would go on in, put in some money, and you would be allowed to breathe clean air. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And as you're probably already aware, the FCC is coming up on a vote to repeal the net neutrality rules laid down by the Obama administration. And apparently the FCC's plan is to use Thanksgiving to sort of hide its attack on net neutrality. So basically the agency is expected to unveil its formal plan tomorrow, Wednesday, while Americans are distracted with holiday preparations, or on Friday, while Americans are out there in the Black Friday shopping maelstrom, which I don't think it's going to be that many out there. But basically they're unveiling a formal date to vote to kill the rules, which is expected to be on December 15th. And the reason they're going through all of this is because when they were accepting public comments, the comments from the American people were overwhelmingly in support of maintaining net neutrality, and even more than that, declaring the Internet a public utility. Because the Internet isn't just a bunch of technoids, sending dot matrix printer centerfolds to each other anymore. It's become a vital, indispensable part of our lives and our commerce, and it should be regulated as a public utility. But the big providers, like Comcast, Spectrum, they want to have a fast lane for their favorite customers and a slow lane for everybody else, such as the independent media. There are some major corporations that are out there that want net neutrality preserved, but unfortunately it looks like corporate interest is going to prevail over what's best for the American people, not to mention the economy. I mean, if the FCC really wanted to do something, I think they need to get involved with this idea that the Internet has become a haven of cyber criminals. But the FCC, like so many other government agencies, seems to view that their mission is really to support corporate profiteering. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not holding a positive thought. They wouldn't be going through all of this if they were planning to allow net neutrality to stay. So it's going to be a problem for a lot of us here. Now then, Intel fixes critical holes in secret management engine hidden in desktop server chipsets. Now, Intel advises Microsoft and Linux users to download and run the Intel SA00086 detection tool to determine if your systems are vulnerable. And if you're at risk, you must obtain new firmware updates from your computer's manufacturer. Lenovo was quick off the mark with patches for its gear. But we're talking about flaws in the actual hardware, in the microcode. Now, Microsoft Windows used to have an interesting little feature. We'll tell you about it when we come back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And getting on back to the computers, Microsoft Windows used to have a system called ASLR, which stands for Address Space Layout Randomization. And what it would do is the way programs are loaded into memory is they're loaded into the first available memory. And that would often create a situation where hackers would know where to find certain bits of code they wanted to use, what's called a code reuse attack. So the ASLR system would basically randomize where in memory the different link objects, code, and it was. So it was always loaded differently every time. And it was a very powerful tool to block the code reuse attacks. Unfortunately, it broke in Windows 8. A Carnegie Mellon CERT researcher has discovered that Microsoft broke some use cases for ASLR. In other words, it's not being randomized anymore, and apparently Windows 10 has that same problem. And right now, because of what I'm going through with Skype, I'm not really all that happy with Microsoft and Skype. So anyway, let's see. Another article, this is out of the Hacker News. Critical flaws in Intel processors leave millions of PCs vulnerable. And the most severe vulnerability involves multiple buffer overflow issues in the operating system kernel for Intel ME firmware that would allow attackers with local access to the vulnerable system to load and execute code outside the visibility of the user and the operating system. Now, are these in fact flaws, or are these some of the NSA mandated backdoors? Because we know that over the years, the NSA, in order to be able to spy on you whenever they want, has mandated there be backdoors in all of our systems, the software, the firmware, the routers, our tablets, our phones. And of course the problem with that is that the NSA's toolkit of hacking tools was leaked out or stolen by some hackers called Shadow Group, who made them available for sale on the dark web. And so it's not just the government breaking into our systems with these powerful tools that we have to worry about. It's everybody with nefarious intent. And in the name of national security, the NSA has rendered our systems wide open. And maybe that's the reason they don't talk about the cybercrime issue. They can't do a thing about it. Another aspect, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, is I think we've allowed our technology to become overly complicated to the point where these companies can't really effectively manage and maintain the code, and that's why it's being sold out the door with so many flaws. That plus the fact that the computer industry is still indemnified against product liability lawsuits. And that was started back when computers were brand new, and it was a fragile industry, and it was felt it needed protection. But computers and computer software are now billion-dollar industries. They're mature, and they should be subject to product liability. Because if you have a business and you buy a van, and because of a design defect, the van crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the van maker. If you buy a computerized accounting system for your business, and because of a design defect, it crashes, and you suffer financial harm, you can't sue the computer and software maker. It's right there in that end-user license agreement that you have to agree to just to open up what your product is. You got to read one of those sometime. I know it's a lot of pages. They do that to discourage you from reading it. But I mean, it's all the advantages of the computer and software companies. They don't even guarantee the software will actually do what you think it's going to do. There was one time where Microsoft had in the end-user license agreement a provision which said they had the right to come into your computer, over the internet anytime they felt and make necessary changes. That got a lot of people very, very upset. Now then, Google executive says new algorithm will hide Russia Today and Sputnik articles. And this is Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google's parent company Alphabet, announced that the company will engineer algorithms that will make it harder for articles from Sputnik News and Russia Today to appear on the Google News service. My response to that is, let's stop using the Google News service. Go on out and find your own news. Don't let Google become the new network TV news. We'll tell you what's important. We'll tell you what to think. We'll tell you what to be afraid of. Another article, this is out of arstechnica.com, and it says, no, you're not being paranoid. Sites really are watching your every mood. And apparently some major companies like Microsoft.com, Adobe.com, and GoDaddy.com are using scripts that record your keystrokes and mouse movements and scrolling behavior in real time, even before the input is submitted or even deleted. They're just doing it all in real time. I'm not sure why. That's out there. Now, Google has finally admitted that it tracked user location data even when the setting was turned off. Android phones gather your location data and they send it to Google. Even if you turn off location services, and you don't even have to have a SIM card in the phone. This is reported by Quartz. You don't need to worry about people peeking through the windows. Most of us have bought the surveillance device that watches us on behalf of the government. Now, getting on back to Eric Schmidt, who is setting himself up as the arbiter of what you will see if you come to Google. He has a long history going back with Obama and Clinton. And so when he's out there saying he's going to derank Russia Today's articles online, he's less concerned for the integrity of news, and his motives appear to be much more partisan. Now, Eric Schmidt has an estimated wealth of $11 billion, and he's never hidden his political leanings. He jumped right into Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign long before she officially announced her candidacy. And in one of John Podesta's leaked emails, the longtime Clinton confidant and chairman of her presidential campaign told her soon-to-be campaign manager Robbie Mook that he had met with Schmidt in April of 2014, more than a year before Clinton told the American public she was hoping to become the next president. Another email written 2 weeks later showed Schmidt sharing his campaign ideas with Clinton aide Cheryl Mills. And then he went on to brainstorm ideas on how to utilize technology in the campaign. Now, that didn't work out very well because, remember, it came out toward the end of the campaign that the Hillary campaign had this computer software that was analyzing the media, analyzing the public, and basically issuing recommendations on how to run the campaign. And considering that she lost, apparently not so well, was even claimed at one time that it was an artificially intelligent system. But he had, the groundwork was founded by analysts and engineers who worked on Obama's campaign and funded by Schmidt, became Clinton's top technology provider. And the groundwork, that was the company that had all this computer stuff, was housed in an office just a few blocks away from Clinton's campaign headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. And Schmidt continued to advise Clinton on digital matters throughout the campaign. Now, I want to take a minute here to talk about artificial intelligence because somebody raised the question the other day, is artificial intelligence really intelligent? And it's a very hard question to answer. Is it self-aware? It's kind of hard to tell. Most people can't even prove they're self-aware. It's just sort of an epiphenomenon of your consciousness. But I think at this stage of software evolution, it's more marketing hype than reality. Now, I will grant you some of these voice recognition systems like Siri do come very close to passing the Turing test, but you can trip them up, which tells me they're not really thinking in the sense that we think thinking is. But it's only a matter of time before we do look into that monitor and find something is looking back. And we do need to be prepared to deal with that. All right, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get some phone calls in here. And meanwhile, getting on back to some other news, apparently the German police have dismantled an ISIS terror cell, and they arrested 6 Syrian refugees. So tell me again, George Soros, how this open borders thing is going to make for a much better world. Because right now, it doesn't look like it's headed that way. Now, we're all waiting for the undercover FBI informant to testify before Congress in the Uranium One deal. But there's something else lurking on the horizon that we need to keep remembering. It is only 10 days now until the FBI is supposed to turn over all the documents they have on that strange meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac at the airport. And everybody was wondering, what was that all about? Was some kind of a deal made then to make sure that the Department of Justice and the FBI were not going to go after Hillary on the email scandal? So hopefully there'll be something there. Of course, by now the FBI could have just written all new documents. But again, it's Judicial Watch, not Congress, not the corporate media. It's Judicial Watch that's doing the heavy lifting, exposing this corruption. And we do need to pay attention to what they're doing. Now, a lot of people were looking over in Europe at this release of radiation that was being detected. Very low level, very weird isotope, ruthenium. And apparently Russian officials confirmed reports of radiation spikes over the Ural Mountains. And the expectation here is that this is not related to nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons testing, that this is an accident at a radiotherapy hospital or a nuclear materials processing plant, but they still haven't narrowed it down. But Russia's saying, yes, they're detecting the radiation as well, and they're working to try and finding out what's going on there. Now, New Zealand has had a study that has linked common herbicides to antibiotic resistance. Now, as you know, antibiotic resistance is a growing problem in the healthcare industry because if the antibiotics stop working, if you have strains of bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics, then you've got a problem. And now we're finding out that common pesticides that are being used may actually be encouraging this evolution of antibiotic-resistant infectious agents basically all over. And it's another reminder, these chemicals get put on out there and sold in the marketplace without really evaluating them properly. And here in the United States of America, of course, that's supposed to be the job of the FDA and the USDA. But clearly they have fallen down. We're going to take a phone call now from Dale in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Okay, so you're having some issues with your computer connectivity with Skype and stuff. There's a program that's been used by a lot of people that stream stuff, and it's called Open Broadcast Software, OBS.
Okay.
Project.com. That might be something you want to look into. There's several VSTs you can get for virtual. What's the word they use? Virtual jacks, but don't use virtual jack. There's actually one, and it's got a funny name. It's Voice Meter Banana. Mm-hmm. That'll give you virtual jacks and stuff like that. A lot of people have been getting around Skype by using this program. I just thought it'd be something to point out to you, since you're having such issues with Skype. Over
the Thanksgiving holiday, I'm definitely going to be looking for some kind of a solution. What I want is a program that will sit on this machine with this IP, and we'll have a copy sitting at RBN on their machine, on their IP, and it just connects directly. The simpler, the better.
You should be able to do that with OBS. Like I said, obsproject.com. It's an open source program, and they do have regular updates. They have a big forum and everything like that. A lot of VST plugins that it does accept, and a lot of people are saying some of these trademarked ones that plugins actually do work very well with the program. But like I said, if you want a virtual jack, don't use virtual jack. It's okay, but Voice Meter Banana is actually better, and the developer has been around for a long time, and he only asks like $25 to have an actual extra. He'll give you the initial virtual jack, but you can get extras for like $25, and full support and everything like that. It's really a better alternative than Skype.
Okay, well, I'll certainly look into it. Actually, my control room technician, Mike, is out there saying they already have an alternative system set up there, so I'm going to try and install that and get that up and running. But the problem is...
Well, good luck with that. RBN's, pretty good on a lot of things, but I've talked to them about technical stuff, and a lot of times they don't know what they're doing, okay?
I wish you wouldn't say that on the air.
Well, I'm just saying,
right.
Mike.
Well, yeah, again, the systems have become too complex. And my issue is that when Skype was taken over by Microsoft and they went from being peer-to-peer to going through the cloud, and then all of a sudden last August, Microsoft forced everybody to download and install a new version of Skype because they had changed the cloud system.
Every program seems... Firefox lately, I've been using DuckDuckGo for quite a while and stuff, but it seems like lately that there's a major lag with trying to, when you're doing your searches and stuff. And I'll tell you and this is the truth, Mike. I would watch videos of YouTube trying to learn the truth and stuff. My internet would go out. I'd have to call my internet provider, try to get all hooked up again and everything like that. I have stopped watching those videos, and I'll broadcast RBN, and my internet never goes down. But the minute I start looking at those specific videos, my internet stops.
Well, that's kind of a scary thing to be thinking about. And again, my issue overall, and that's because I'm old enough to remember when computers were simple, elegant, they did what you wanted, and you got a lot of work done. And if there was some kind of a problem, you powered off, you powered on, and it was back to the factory condition, like my little Commodore 20 up there. But here's the situation.
Everything's gone to heck. Everything is just terrible anymore. I mean, the support is just terrible, and when you try to call in for some kind of help, you can't understand who's talking about what. I mean, speak English, please. Everything's just gone to heck in a handbasket, and people just won't boycott anything, Mike. That's the problem. If we just stood up and said, look, I ain't buying your product, I ain't using your product, but people just won't do it. I don't know what it'll take to make them do it, but one of these days they'll finally get smart enough and realize, hey, if I stop using their junk, maybe they'll go out of business.
Well, unfortunately, the junk, as you call it, is indispensable. I mean, obviously, I need this equipment to be on the radio show. I need it to do the other things that I do. But my issue is that all of this time that we are spent patching and updating and fixing and fidgeting with our equipment is time that we're not spending doing what it is we could actually make money with.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. We spend way too much time update this, update that. The problem with developers today is they figure, we'll just get it out, and we'll just make an update. You spend more update.
Okay. Dale,
you're totally correct. You're totally correct.
Dale, I got to let you go. Sorry, we'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And allow me to share with you what's going on, because I'm getting emails from people saying the sound is distorted, and yes, we're trying to sort that all out. Basically, what happened is I had a laptop running Skype. That's all it had to do. And we started having this problem where Skype would just drop the connection. And I did a little online research and found out that apparently the latest version of Skype has issues with any computers using the Realtek audio system. And this is affecting a lot of people, like Windows 10 users especially, are having problems with audio. And so what I did is I've ordered a new laptop to run the Skype. It'll be here in about a week. And what I've done right now is I've commandeered my wife's choir laptop, and we're trying to get this to be working a little bit better. But it's like I said, the problem is I had it all set up and working this morning, and the instant we connected with Skype, Skype changed a bunch of internal settings. And I really do not appreciate software that thinks it knows what I want better than I do. And I understand that the push has been more and more to providing computers and softwares and tablets and iPhones to people who are not technoids. But there should still be an option where you can click a box saying, I'm a technoid, let me make my own choices, but that's kind of gone away. All right, let's see. We're going to take another phone call from Tom in Philadelphia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm sorry you're having so much trouble. I just wanted to kind of refute this guy you were just talking to. RBN does know what they're doing, because a lot of the times I'm assisting either in-house or remotely. I think they're doing a heck of a good job on a shoestring budget. So instead of, putting us down, get out your checkbook, send us some money, and we can get even better equipment and, make the place even better. But, the fact is they've got a lot of technical resources there. Mike knows what he's doing. Dan knows what he's doing. And when they get stuck, they call me. And I'm the guy that went down there from Pennsylvania and spent 10 days down there rebuilding everything and brought them new computers. So I've been a network administrator for over 20 years. I've been working on a computer over 30. So I think I got a little bit of experience. So RBN's in good hands.
It certainly sounds like it. And again, what some of the people who are complaining about don't realize that while we are a radio network, we don't have the resources of corporate media. If you go into your local corporate radio station or TV station, you're going to see the very latest in broadcast equipment, professional grade, and we're putting this whole thing together using prosumer or even consumer level equipment. Especially here in Hawaii with our salt climate, it all behaves like it's made out of compressed rust. And you would be astounded at how much equipment I've gone through, where I'll buy it, I'll use it, and then I have to just throw it away because it's corroded, and replace it over and over again. and it's a never-ending battle. But the point I was trying to make here is that when we go to the store and we buy a piece of equipment, if it comes to us already defective, it only makes our work that much harder. But you're absolutely right. If we could find an angel to come on in and drop some serious money on RBN, we could have a professional level broadcast studio. But again, because of Dan and Mike and Phil here, Tom here, that we are trying to produce a professional level broadcast experience. We don't always succeed. We're not succeeding today, and I acknowledge that. But if you knew the limitations of what we're dealing with, you would understand that it is a bit of a task here.
Absolutely, especially trying to do with all the hosts you got. A little bit of help on your problem. A lot of times, over the years, I've found the advice is if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't always upgrade just because a new version comes out unless you're absolutely required to do it because of compatibility. Now, you had a problem where you installed a new version and it made a whole bunch of changes. You could try doing a quick system restore back if you have a real close restore point. Jump it back and see if that helps your problem.
Well, the problem is that the older versions of Skype will no longer work. I mean, I thought about deleting Skype and going back to the version I had that worked halfway decently, but apparently it will no longer work with the new Skype cloud server. That's why Microsoft made everybody upgrade, and I'm seeing in my web searches all over, everybody's unhappy, especially their business customers who've been using Skype for conference calling. They can't reach their clients. This is a real huge mess, and Microsoft doesn't seem to be working all that hard to fix it. But Mike has suggested switching over to another system that we already looked at earlier, and I think I'm probably going to be installing that this afternoon.
Well, good luck with that. If I can help you, Mike knows how to get a hold of me.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. I appreciate the help. So.
Okay, buddy. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Okay. Now then.
Can we talk about...
Okay, I think that was the ghost of our past. And I think we're still coming up on the commercial break here. So when we come on back, a couple of notes about Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get some phone calls in here. Well, apparently the chief of the FCC, Ajit Pai, is out there making a statement that killing net neutrality will set the Internet free. And he says we're going to see an explosion in the kinds of connectivity and the depth of that connectivity like never before. Well, no, what we're going to see is the big players hogging the bandwidth for themselves. That's what it's really all about. Now, when they broke up the Bell Telephone Company into the regional phone companies, they established a principle called common carrier, which meant everybody carried everybody's traffic, and they gave it equal priority. And why this should not apply to the Internet, I don't understand. But apparently there are all these new companies that are coming on out with streaming video and streaming audio, and especially now with 4K TV. There's literally a fight for the available bandwidth because these companies are not spending the money to increase their bandwidth. And considering that the United States actually invented the Internet in the first place, it's rather surprising to find out that many other countries actually have faster Internet to the consumer level than the United States does. Japan already has gigabit rates going into the individual homes. So it looks like basically the large corporations want to grab the majority of the available bandwidth for their commercial endeavors, and us ordinary people are just going to be shuffled off into a corner. So in point of fact, it's not setting the Internet free. It is basically turning the Internet into another corporate-controlled content delivery platform, just with more buttons than you have on your TV set. Some of which have too many buttons as it is. I remember TVs that had just two knobs, off-on volume and the channel selector. Sometimes I miss how simple that all was. I'll tell you something that really annoys me. I'll be watching TV and all of a sudden there'll be a pop-up that says firmware has been updated. And can't you wait until the show is over to show that to me? You start to wonder, are you using that appliance, or is the appliance using you? And all that other talk about how TVs are now watching the people, spying on them. So, no, I don't agree with the FCC chair. Ending net neutrality is not going to set the Internet free, other than for the large corporations who are free to commandeer more of the bandwidth. And what it basically means is those corporations, like streaming video, streaming audio, who've got the money to pay the additional fees will get the faster bandwidth. And small businesses, small companies, independent media who don't have that kind of financing, we're going to be put in the slow lane. And we're already slow in too many parts of the country as it is. Alrighty, let's see. Let's go on. We already talked about the 45 teachers from Philadelphia. So, apparently, over in India, now remember, India not too long ago decided that they were going to be the test case for establishing a cashless society, and they basically banned and took out of circulation their higher denomination currency. The lower, smaller bills are still in use, but it had a very disastrous effect on the Indian economy, and they're now in trouble. And so now India is having to bail out their banks. Their economy is slowing down, and it's nearing what they're calling a critical situation. And it is very alarming in this rush toward the New World Order that we're seeing changes being brought about to our economy, education, every area of our lives that are not in the best interest of ordinary people. They're just there to make the whole planet a much more efficient human ranch for those who would sit on the golden throne of planet Earth. And I do find myself resistant to that whole idea. So apparently another problem for the iPhone X. Now, as you know, I think Apple has really blown it on this one. First of all, that face scanner fails a lot, and there's no fingerprint scanner to get around it. If it doesn't think you are you're not going to get into your phone. Then it has the problem with being very fragile. If you drop it at a height of 3 feet, it's going to crack the case and possibly stop the phone from working. Just 3 feet. Part of the problem is to have their wireless charging, they put a glass back on it instead of a metal back. Then you have the fact that hackers have already figured out a way where they can spoof the facial ID. So there's no security advantage in having that. Then, of course, it's $1,000 for a telephone handset. $1,000. And I think they've really made a mistake with this. And now it's come on out that apparently the iPhone X is assembled with illegal student labor. And apparently over in China, they've removed apps from their store, including Skype. And apparently China is saying that a number of voice-over internet protocols do not comply with local law. So they're having their problems over there. Now here's an interesting little story. This came out of one of the blogspot.com websites. And apparently it's at a public event with U.S. military recruiters present. And this individual who wrote the article walked by their display table, wondering if any of them knew that they recruit for lie-started and illegal wars of aggression. And he met one who's very honest and forthright in saying, yeah, the wars are illegal and started with lies. But, we're here to recruit people. And so we're going to give them the story. And by the way, something for you parents whose children are considering entering military service. The promises made by military recruiters are not legally enforceable. They'll get your kid onto that desk and say, if you sign this, I guarantee you'll be trained as a nuclear medicine technician, and when you come out of your military service, assuming you're still alive and in one piece, you will be qualified to enter these jobs. And then the kid signs up and winds up spending his entire time in service, or her time in service, peeling potatoes. You can't sue for the broken promise. They're not enforceable. Just something to keep in mind. We're going to go to the phones here. Steve in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha. We love your show. You do a great job. I was just calling because you were talking with one of your callers about the economy, and I found a book in my house that was written by Lindsey Williams, who was the chaplain for Atlantic Refining Company when they were working up in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And they said they were positive, and Lindsey Williams guarantees it, that there is enough oil up in Alaska to satisfy this country's oil needs for the next 200 years. However, the government kept them from revealing it or pumping it out. I believe if that's true, maybe the government didn't want to put Saudi Arabia out of business because they know Saudi Arabia is holding up the U.S. dollar.
I've heard this story before, and of course, obviously, in order to prop up oil prices, they can't dump all the available oil on the market, and so they may have. If this story is true, and I heard from one party that it was an urban legend, but if the story was true, it may be simply that this oil is being held in reserve, that they don't feel that they need to harvest it now because of the existing supplies. But I think what suggests that this story may be more of a fantasy is this very dangerous practice of drilling down very, very deep in the earth to where the oil and gas are under tremendous pressure. That's what the Deepwater Horizon was all about, just drilling way, way down in the Gulf of Mexico where they were going to find more oil and gas and bring it online. But, of course, it's very dangerous to work at those pressures, and that's why there should have been an acoustic blowout preventer on that rig, because when that giant bubble of gas came up that pipe followed by the oil, it has pressure enough to break those metal components. And you've seen how thick the piping and accessories are on these oil rigs. It takes a lot of force to break them, but they can do break. They can and do break. That's what a blowout is all about. So maybe
Lindsey Williams said he got proof that this oil that's in the North Slope of Alaska is not under low pressure. In other words, he says it'll come out by itself. They don't even have to pump it because it's such a huge amount of oil and in a good condition where it will come up. So, I mean, you can say that this story is baloney, but I know Lindsey Williams, he's a decent Christian man, and he wouldn't give us a line of bull. So I can only figure that they want to keep the relationship with Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia continues to prop up our dollar.
Could very well be. But I would like to see, photos and maybe a location on Google Earth. If this stuff is just boiling up out of the ground, then it should be visible in Google Earth. Anyway, listen, yes. Steve, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Terry in Oregon. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Terry, are you there? Okay, I think we lost Terry. Boy, what a day for gremlins.
You hear me okay, Mike?
Oh, there you are, Terry.
Yeah, you hear me okay now?
I hear you now just fine. What's on your mind?
Okay, I was hearing an echo. Talking about Saudi Arabia, with all these changes, they're talking about Saudi Arabia having conflict with Lebanon, and I just hope it's not something that's contrived to get the U.S. to say, oh, Saudi Arabia's got a problem, and we promised to go in and defend them because that was part of the petrodollar deal, that we would supply their defense. So that gives us an excuse to go in the Middle East full force with troops and everything. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I can see your point of view here, and I'm actually concerned that Israel and Saudi Arabia may attack Lebanon over this weekend, again, while the American people are distracted because Israel has done that before. But I think the push into Lebanon is more for Israel's sake than Saudi Arabia. And it may be a quid pro quo where Saudi Arabia is going to help with Lebanon in exchange for Israel helping with Iran. Israel wants that Litani River. They want that fresh water. They've tried to get it many times before, and they keep getting pushed back by Hezbollah, hence the current attack to get Hezbollah to disarm. But I think ultimately Saudi Arabia is planning on forcing a confrontation with Iran. Russia has already committed to support Iran against aggression, the way Russia supported Syria against aggression. And the U.S., of course, will come in on the side of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and we'll have World War III running off for real. And it's a very, very dangerous situation because after 16 years of war around the globe, our military are exhausted. Their equipment is worn out. The new equipment coming out of the factories is junk. Tremendous morale problems in virtually all branches of the service. We understand the Air Force is short of qualified combat pilots. We know that the Navy is short of qualified command crews from all the ship collisions they've been having lately. Again, I don't think we can win a conventional war against a true military peer. We certainly didn't against Russia in Syria. And that basically tells me that at some point, the U.S. will resort to its nuclear arsenal. They could even start with the nuclear weapons instead of saving them for the end. And once that gets going, we're really going to be in bad shape.
But do these people at the top realize all this? I mean, I worked at the Pentagon, and, there's some pretty good intelligence. They knew what was going on. So these people have to tell the decision makers, hey, it doesn't look good, and here's all the reasons why.
Yeah, but if the decision makers aren't really looking at those reports, or if their underlings are filtering the reports, and we know that the White House staff are definitely filtering what gets to Donald Trump, then they're making their decisions based on inadequate information. Plus, they're caught up in the groupthink, this idea that the United States has never lost a war, which is not true. We lost in Vietnam. We never won in North Korea during the Korean War. And contrary to the film and TV movies you've seen, we didn't exactly win World War I and World War II all by ourselves. And, of course, they've all got their bunkers. If it all goes wrong, they're going to go down to the Greenbrier or Mount Weather or any of these other little luxury underground cities, and they'll just sort of wait it all out, and they'll come on up, and the world will be wonderful. It'll be free of those pesky little humans, and they'll just basically, say, well, we blew that, but, at least we came out alive. I remember back in the 60s, when the Cold War was still raging, there was actually this senator who got up on the floor of the Congress and actually said, if World War III leaves only one couple alive on Earth, I want that couple to be American. What a ridiculous thing to say. For a variety of reasons.
Yeah, it shows you the mentality, and, what the decision makers are probably saying is, don't confuse me with a fact. I know what we want to do, and we're going to do it. So don't advise me of the fact that we can't be successful, because this is what we are decided to do.
Well, there's a lot of that going on, and then, of course, you may have people who are along that path of the paper who want to look good to the boss, and they may be, again, passing along the reports that say, yes, we can do it, and not passing along the other reports. And even the intelligence agencies will blow it. The CIA totally missed the Soviet Union going into Afghanistan. And they almost completely missed the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. So they're not as swift as sometimes you like to think that they are.
Right. Okay, Mike, thank you very much. Have a good Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to let you go. And speaking of Thanksgiving, RBN is giving our overworked and underpaid staff both Thursday and Friday off, so those shows are going to be repeat. And because of that, the Lady Claire will be joining us in hour 3 tomorrow, assuming I can get all the bugs worked out of this system here. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And somebody wrote on in to say, I heard that the oil in Alaska is being sold to other countries and not being used for the U.S. They can make more money that way. Well, it's not as simple as all that. When you talk about oil coming out of the ground, it's not always the same depending upon where you're drilling. You've probably heard the phrase light sweet crude, and that is a reference to a very fluid liquid oil that can go through refineries easy, and it has a greater proportion of specific distillates that are desired for market. And so where the oil goes depends on available transportation. Is there a pipeline all the way from Alaska down to the U.S.? And how much can it carry? And if it can't carry a lot, well, let's see who wants to buy the oil. So it really is a supply and demand issue across the entire globe. And again, oil is something that is now in such shortage. We are, in fact, fighting wars over the oil and over what currency the oil is traded in, which gets back to that whole petrodollar idea. And it's kind of interesting to realize just how much of this oil and gas is burned up by the machinery of war. I mean, here on Hawaii, we're hearing military aircraft on training flights overhead all the time. And those of you driving your car to strive for 20 mile per gallon mileage, you would be astounded at how much fuel these aircraft guzzle just in a single flight. So it really is a very stark difference. But again, like I was saying earlier in the show, it's estimated 5.6 trillion with a T dollars have been spent on the last 16 years of war. How different would our country be if that 5.6 trillion had been invested back in this country, repairing the infrastructure, bringing back our industry, maybe reversing the damage of GMO to our agricultural sector? Unfortunately, we do not seem to have wise leadership. We seem to have this sort of frat boy society, or frat girl, sorority girls and frat boys, in the halls of power. All right, we're going to take one last phone call for the show. W down in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, real quick, just back to that net neutrality situation.
Yeah.
I think, we're Republicans, supporters of Trump. They definitely need to, let him know that net neutrality is going to affect the next election, because the public, everybody's impacted by this. So, you can't just sit on the sidelines and say, well, because Obama, this is something Obama likes, I'm just going to take it away just like that. You have to be objective about some things and not just be so emotional, like, oh, this is Obama's thing. This net neutrality is going to impact everybody on all political spectrums, everything. So I think it's just real important. So that's all.
You raise a very, very good point here, because it was the internet and the independent media that helped overcome Hillary's election fraud and put Trump in the White House. If he allows the net neutrality to be ended, we're not going to be able to be there for him in 2020. Anyway, there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here and take a hammer to some of this equipment and try and coerce it into working properly. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire. So have a good evening and aloha, America.